To the third webinar in our Tribal Green Casino series, the Solid Waste and Food Recovery. My name is Shannon Judd, and I'm one of the co-chairs of the Tribal P2 Workgroup. So today we have Andrew Shakman, the president and co-founder of LeanPath Incorporated, and Jean McInnis, the Environmental Protection Administrator for the Mohegan Tribe of Connecticut. So first we'll have Andrew Shakman speaking. I'll let him introduce himself and tell a little bit about himself and give his presentation. So thank you all for attending. So Andrew, you can go ahead.
Great. Thank you, Shannon. And I'm going to be bringing my slides up so everyone has an opportunity to see them in just a moment. By way of introduction, I am with LeanPath, and we are a company based in Portland, Oregon that works all across the U.S. on food waste prevention. So I've spent about the last, 9+ years working on preventing food waste in food service operations. And it's been fascinating to watch how this topic has gone from something that originally people didn't really understand very well to one where now I think there's just broad-based interest and passion around doing something to address this. And so at LeanPath, what we do is we're helping people measure food waste to reduce it. But my conversation today is going to be very general, and it's going to be about source reduction and particularly how you go about food waste prevention. So I'm going to move pretty quickly because we do have limited time today, and I'm just going to dive right in. We're going to talk a little bit about why prevention really matters, and I think this is fairly intuitive but worth spending a few minutes on. We'll then talk about some strategies to prevent food waste, what some of the solutions are that involve measurement, including past, present, and future alternatives, and I'll do just a couple of case study slides towards the end here. So if you look at this problem, the EPA has some great numbers, and there's lots of numbers out there, but we know that the problem is really big. Maybe it's a third of all food that we're producing globally, 40% in the U.S. The numbers aren't going to be precise, but I think the general directional trend is that this is a big, big problem, and it's only been growing, and so it deserves our attention. It deserves our attention because, first of all, it's costing a lot of money. We are putting about $250 billion a year into the garbage with food waste, and that's a global number, but it's a stunning number, $250 billion a year. And then you look at the environmental impacts, and you see the massive consumption of fresh water and oil that goes into the food system, and then you follow it from there to the landfilling impacts with methane gas escape from landfills, and you recognize that this is a problem that's not just an environmental really significant issue, it's also a significant financial opportunity. And so as we think about things that are worthy of our time, there aren't too many that align so perfectly where we can both save money and also do the right thing for the environment at the same time, as exists when we focus on food waste. Now today I'm going to be focusing my discussion specifically in the food service realm, and there's a lot of other places that food waste happens, but because we're speaking to tribal casinos and we're focusing on some of those environments, we're going to be drilling in right there. So in the food service world, there tend to be two types of food waste. There's pre-consumer and post-consumer. And the pre-consumer is the stuff that we're throwing away due to overproduction, spoilage, expiration, and trimmings. So trimmings would be the trimmings from fresh produce and meat. And these items are things that are tending to be thrown away by kitchen staff. They are things within the control and custody of the food service operator. Whereas post-consumer waste is what we often call plate waste, which is what's left on a guest's plate or tray at the end of a meal period. And that tends to be as a result of what a guest is choosing to eat, what they take, how hungry they are. It has something to do with portion sizes. So we have control over both of these streams, but we have more control over pre-consumer because it's food service employees who are making these decisions. Now, I mention this because often when we talk about waste, we talk about it as food waste. We talk about it as being one thing. And I would submit to you that food waste is actually two very different things because the pre-consumer and post-consumer happen for different reasons. And as a result, it's important to have strategies to address each of these independently. Now, if we drill right into the pre-consumer food waste, we know that somewhere between 4 and 10% of the food that is purchased ends up being thrown away at the pre-consumer level. So what does this really mean? That means overproduction, spoilage, expiration, and trimmings are adding up to 4 to 10% of our purchases. So if we spend $1 million on food purchases, we are throwing away somewhere between $40 and $100,000 on that million. And that adds up to an $8 to $20 billion problem in the U.S. out-of-home food business. So these are really big numbers, even when you drill down right to the U.S. and you drill down right to the out-of-home food market, you look just at pre-consumer, we're talking billions and billions of dollars of waste. So I probably got your attention. I probably had it already because you've chosen to come to this webinar today. And you say, okay, it's a big problem, but where do we begin? And there's lots of things that we can do out there that range from, aerobic digesters to dehydrators to portion control. There's all sorts of things. And sometimes this is a little bit confusing, and it can make you feel a little bit dizzy because you're not sure where to start. And so I always recommend that people go first to get organized by looking at the EPA food waste hierarchy, which is probably the single clearest, most useful graphic tool that we have in the food waste management world. And it's straightforward. It basically says there are a series of things which are really good to do about food waste, and then as you move down this hierarchy, there are things which are less attractive to do about food waste. And it's often the case that people will start at the bottom and work their way up. And so I want to point out today that source reduction, which means prevention and minimization of food waste, is at the top of this hierarchy. And so if we want to think about where we should be investing our time and energy, source reduction is the place to do it. Now you might say, why? Why is source reduction at the top of the hierarchy? And the answer is in three areas. Financially, we know that when we source reduce, we save money on the food that we purchased. If we didn't waste it, we didn't have to buy it. Whereas any other solution for food waste, whether it's donating it or composting it, which are both really good things to do, or other things, you've already bought the food, and you're not going to save upstream. You're going to save on disposal costs if you're doing some things that divert from landfill perhaps, but you're not going to save upstream. So if you want to maximize your financial savings, you've got to source reduce in order to get the supply chain cost savings that otherwise you just can't access. Secondly, environmentally, a lot of our attention has focused rightly on methane gas emissions from landfills and the environmental consequences associated with that. But, and that's important, but we often forget that the bigger environmental impact is arguably in the food system, in the production and transportation of the food. It's in all of those farm inputs, the fertilizers and pesticides and herbicides and tractor fuel and refrigeration and all of those things that are using carbon assets and producing emissions to air, soil, and water. So if we could bring our food system into a much less wasteful place, we would have a leveraged impact that would be much greater than just the landfill issue that we're dealing with, which is independently important. And then third, we know that socially, when we think about things that are important, we think about people, planet, and profit. And I've talked about the profit and the planet, but the people side is also critical. And when we do source reduction, we bring this challenge right into our food service operation. So it becomes something that isn't someone else's concern. When we're focusing on prevention, we have to do something here in our kitchen as opposed to putting it out on the loading dock and counting on someone else to do the right thing with it. And so that empowers our employees, it engages them, it gets them thinking about food and the value of food in a more holistic way. So prevention is the only way that you get these maximized financial, environmental, and social impacts. And so hopefully I've left you with a takeaway here from today's discussion that prevention should overshadow everything else that you do, including many other worthy things. So I'm not here to say that anything else on the hierarchy is in any way lacking. It's all critical, but prevention often gets ignored, so I'm here to raise the cheer for that today. So once you start thinking about prevention, you might say, well, how do I go about doing that? And I would suggest that you have to first change your perspective and look at food service, and particularly casino food service, as an opportunity to learn some things from the manufacturing world, where for years we've been eliminating waste. Because when you look at a kitchen, it's really just a big manufacturing plant. In fact, it's one of the more complicated factories you'll ever see because it produces so many different products. It's not just one product, it's in many cases hundreds, sometimes thousands of products. So the materials we're working with, of course, are food, not steel, not plastic. We're dealing with food. And so we're going to have to see what can we learn from the manufacturing world that will allow us to deal with this problem. And so we start usually by figuring out, well, what's going on? Why is this being caused? And this is the same thing we would do in any factory. What's the reason why waste is happening? And there tend to be a few drivers. The first is we don't want to run out of food. We know that we don't want to disappoint a customer and we don't want to lose the revenue. So the antidote is we make a little extra so that we don't run out. And often that leads to waste. Secondly, we know that there's no option but to serve safe food. We're simply not going to take any shortcuts, nor should we. Safe food is critical. So what we do is we build a safety margin around the food, and then we build another margin around that, and then another margin around that. And we tend to be so conservative that we build a huge set of margins of error. And so in many cases, we throw away food that is safe just because we're concerned that there might be some risk. And we see this a lot, particularly in grocery, with expiration dates on food that's perfectly safe and healthy, but it's just got a date on it. So that's the thing that can lead to some food waste. We know that merchandising drives customer satisfaction and sales. We want things to look beautiful and bountiful, but that comes with a cost, and the cost is that we put a lot out, and often that becomes waste. So, and this is also true for the entrees. If we're serving plated meals, we often want those meals to be really full and big on the plate, and so we put bigger portions out than we might need because we want to impress people. So that's a waste driver. Labor cost is another. We know that labor is always an issue. It's one of the top costs we manage. And so some people have looked at how can we minimize labor by maybe making larger batches, not having to have as many cooks on duty for as many hours. Of course, what happens is when we build large batches, they inevitably lead to waste, because one of the single sort of core tenets of lean production is single piece production, that you don't want to build big batches because inherently you're going to end up mismatching the batch with the market demand. So labor sometimes, labor controls sometimes lead us to waste. And then of course we want convenient service and wide choice and broad availability, so we have lots of things on our menus. So I would suggest to you that all of these things are independent drivers, and we've paid for each one of these priorities by wasting a little more. And that has, over time, accumulated into a big problem. So if you think of this like a balloon, where you're pushing on all sides of the balloon, and the only side you're not pushing on is waste, it kind of pops out and it inherits the problem. So if we want to deal with fixing waste, we want to source, reduce, and prevent food waste, we have to acknowledge that these levers exist, and we have to be prepared to bring and restore some balance to the system. It doesn't mean that any of these shouldn't be on our list of considerations. They all have to be on our list of considerations, but we have to add waste to the list. We can't ignore it. So how do we do that? What can we do to put waste on the list? So the first thing we have to do is we have to recognize that any solution we bring needs to begin with culture rather than strategy. Kitchen culture is going to eat strategy for lunch. So we have got to create a culture that's ready to reduce waste. And the way we do that is we have to acknowledge some stigmas. The first is that many culinary professionals think waste is a sign of negligence. They think that if they acknowledge they have waste, they're basically saying they're doing a poor job. And that's just not true. Every food service operation has waste. The big difference is the ones that talk about it openly are the ones that solve it. So we have got to remove the stigma and get people focused on the fact that it's not an individual performance matter. This is something everyone struggles with. The second thing that we will hear sometimes from people is that our operation has very little food waste. And I run into that occasionally. I've got lots of stories of people kind of folding their arms and telling me, yeah, we don't have much waste here. And I used to kind of let that slide and say, well, gosh, good job. And now I've learned to ask just exactly how much waste do you have? Because the truth is that in most cases they can't answer that question, and they don't really know how much waste they have. They're just hoping that the problem isn't a big one. So if we want to do a culture reset, we have to go positive, and we have to recognize that addressing food waste is a good thing, even while the food waste itself is a bad thing. And we want to embrace data. We want to find information that's going to help guide us on this journey. So those are a couple of key learnings. Now, the next thing that we need to do is we need to be inclusive in our culture, and we need to be focused. So the truth is that managers can do the best job in the world of planning the work, but even the most perfect production plan will never get executed perfectly, because everyone on the team brings their own judgment and decision making to the table. And someone will remember, gosh, I remember 3 years ago when I got yelled at for running out of bacon. So I'm going to always make a little extra, and that goes through people's minds. And so these things cause us to deviate from forecasts, even really good, carefully planned forecasts. So we've got to be inclusive and get our frontline teams to be the ones who are helping to prevent and minimize waste. This is not something that can be done from an office. Now, the way that we do that is we engage those teams by setting goals. And goals should be very specific, very focused around specific items that we want to reduce waste around. So I'm going to talk a little bit more about that in a minute, but just want to emphasize that an anti-waste culture is going to be open, transparent, and positive. It's going to be driven by data. It's going to be inclusive of everyone on the team, and it's going to be very focused and use goals to keep people on task. So if you were thinking kind of, what are the nuts and bolts here? I'm going there, but don't forget the culture. You got to start with setting the right tone, and that is critical to preventing waste. I'm sorry that there's no simple box to check on this problem, and sometimes people want there to be a simple answer that if we fix it, we can forget it. But with food waste, this is something that's going to require ongoing vigilance. It's just like managing quality or safety or sanitation. It's just a matter of regular practice. You have to just make it part of the discipline of the operation. So you've got to be ready to make this part of your daily routine. We're going to focus our culture not just on all those safety and sanitation items. We're going to also deal with food waste. So how do we do it? The answer, and now I am getting into the nuts and bolts, and I promised that I would. The answer that I have found to be the most significant impact on waste prevention is measurement. I'll say that again. The single most important impact on waste prevention, food waste prevention, is measurement. When we measure food waste, we get data, and that data allows us to make changes. We engage people because the act of tracking includes them. We set a positive tone because we have information and we can thank people for helping us to get it, and we can show them how that information is helping us get better. And we can use the data to set those SMART goals that I mentioned earlier, those very specific, measurable, actionable, realistic, and time-bound goals. So you need data to do those things. So when you put a tracking or measurement program in place, you're going to set a baseline. You're going to use your data to set a baseline, which is going to allow you to visualize trends and see whether things are getting better or getting worse. And this is critical because with composting or food donation, you're going to see how much you're donating or how much you're composting. But with food waste prevention, there's nothing to see. We're talking about the absence of something rather than the presence of it. So you've got to have data to be able to define that negative space, which is the savings. So you need that baseline to know if things are getting better or worse. The tracking, of course, by giving you that data, is going to let you be very surgical in diagnosing the issues and solving them. There's nothing more frustrating to a chef than telling them that you've got 2,000 pounds of food waste at the buffet and we have no idea what food it is. It's just frustrating. If you can say to them it's on Tuesday, it's mashed potatoes, it's on Wednesday, it's desserts, it's on Thursdays, it's bread. Now we can do something about it. So getting that data allows us to get specific. And then, as I mentioned earlier, by tracking the data, it's inclusive. You don't make that waste tracking one person's responsibility. You make it everyone's responsibility. And what that does is that sends a message. You may think you're collecting data, but before you're collecting data, you're actually sending a message to your team that waste matters. It matters enough to take your time to record this information. So just keep that in mind, that the very act of collecting the data establishes a set of priorities, and it just puts that balance back into that balloon I explained earlier by saying, hey, waste is on the list too. So, if you're not tracking waste, it's really hard to know how to do better. And I think as operators, we all know that we manage the things we measure, and the things that we measure get done. So this is pretty straightforward. We got to measure. So what's worth measuring? So in the pre-consumer realm, I'm going to recommend daily pre-consumer waste tracking and focusing on overproduction, spoilage, expiration, and trimmings. Those are going to be the main items. And you've got to track it enough detail to be able to get that diagnostic information to be able to make change. So that's a critically important thing to remember. You don't want to track at such a high level that you can't make change. So how can you go about doing this? There is, first of all, a difference between auditing and tracking. Auditing tends to be a one point in time freeze frame whereas tracking is a continuous daily discipline. So I just want to clarify that. Auditing serves a role and it's important, but what I'm talking about here is daily tracking of pre-consumer waste. The post-consumer you can track less frequently because it doesn't need to be quite as detailed because it's already kind of commingled plate waste. But with pre-consumer, that stuff's already source separated, so it's worth doing. And you can really see clearly what you're throwing away. So there are three kind of ways of doing tracking. The first is with manual data collection using paper logs and PC data entry. You can collect by weight or volume or count. It uses visual estimates, typically handwritten, and then you do have to go and type it into Excel or something to be able to see what's going on. The pros on this is it's cheap. You can get going immediately. There's some free resources available. EPA is developing a superb Excel-based tool for this that is good for sort of short-term tracking solutions. The downside is that long-term this gets really expensive. It's expensive from a labor point of view, even though it's cheap upfront in terms of systems, and it can be difficult to manage. It just takes a lot of time, and it's you got to do a lot of manual data entry, and it's just hard to sustain. The data quality also is never going to be quite as granular as automated systems because you're just not going to get the organization of the data. You're going to have lag time. You're going to have lost information. And of course, you're working with guesstimates. And I guess the last thing is just there's not a ton of feedback to the staff. When you write something down on a piece of paper, it doesn't say a lot back to you. So we found that when you move from a manual system to something automated, you can save about 4 times more waste. You can increase your waste reduction 4 times versus a manual system. So manual is a great place to start. Automation is the thing that kind of hits the tipping point to make tracking an effective, fast, and easy thing that you can do every day and over the long term. And so automation tools look like this with scales and touchscreen terminals. People basically put data into the system by putting an item on a scale. Think of it like a cash register for food waste and entering data around what it is, who's throwing it away, what it is that's being discarded, why it's being discarded, what kind of container it's in so you can deduct the tare weight. And then at the end of that transaction, the employee sees a value of the item that they threw away. So there's this aha moment where they go, wow, I had no idea. So automated tracking really kind of moves things up a notch in terms of effectiveness and ease of use. And of course, that data then is instantly in software, so you can see reports and those sorts of things. Once you have the data, then you have the ability to set goals and drive change. So one level up from automation is going to be the future, which is going to be cloud-based automation, where we're going to get to near real-time data in the field, which will offer a personalized experience for employees where rather than collecting data and having reports looked at by managers in the future, this data will be provided directly to the employees, directly in the food service operation at the time that they record an item, because when they put an item in, it'll go up into the cloud, and then it'll immediately report back to the employee what that item is worth and be able to provide them with some overall summary data on how they and their operation are doing, rather than having to wait for a report to be printed. So all of these things are coming, they're on the horizon, and so you've got a series of ways that you can do tracking, from starting with paper, which you can start tomorrow, to moving to automation. And I'll close just with a couple of case studies. Typically, when people start tracking, they cut their pre-consumer waste in half. They can save 2 to 6% on their food purchases, and this is a big deal. Those are big dollars, as well as the labor and energy and waste disposal costs. And a few just examples. These are not tribal casino examples, but this is a college organization that saved almost 50% in waste. This is a casino example, the MGM Grand, where they're saving almost $8,000 a month due to food costs due to tracking food waste, which they reduced their food waste by 80%. Another college that, in their case, saved about $300,000, 60% reduction. So the point here is there is a lot of leverage in tracking, and we know that there are many things calling your attention around food waste, but hopefully the thing you've gotten from Andrew Shakman today is prevention is at the top of the hierarchy for a reason. It saves you more money, it saves the environment or reduces the environmental impact in the most optimum and maximized ways, and it engages people. And the mechanism to go after prevention is measurement. Remember, in doing this, you don't have to be perfect. You just need to start moving towards your goals. That is what's critical. Just put one foot in front of the next. And remember when you're doing that, we talk a lot about zero waste. remember that there's no such thing as a true zero waste program if you're not also doing source reduction. Just diverting waste from landfills without minimizing it isn't a complete solution. So anyway, if you're interested in learning more, there's a good website that we've got up called Food Waste Stats, which has a bunch of data on some of these things that I shared today. And with that, I will conclude my, my remarks, and I think we're going to do questions at the end.
Okay, thank you very much, Andrew. And yes, we will save questions for the end. Please feel free to type them in as you think of them, and we'll have some time at the end to go over some of them. One question I will answer quickly that's come up a couple times is people have asked if there's an electronic version of this available, and there will be online at tribalp2.org. There will be a recording available either later today or tomorrow for those of you that want to go back and listen again or pass it on to others. So with that, we will go to Jean McInnis, who is the Environmental Protection Administrator for Mohegan Tribe of Connecticut. So go ahead, Jean. Thank you.
Thank you. I'm Jean McInnis. I'm the Environmental Protection Administrator for the Mohegan Tribe, which is located in Uncasville, Connecticut. And since 2002, we have had a food waste recycling program. So I'm going to go ahead and put this on full screen. Okay, does that look like where I'm supposed to be?
Jean, I think you just need to accept the invitation to share your screen. Are you able to see the invitation? Sorry, everyone. It looks like we're having just a momentary technical difficulty. We'll see if we can get Jean back in just a moment.
If we're waiting for Jean, I could ask, there's one question here that I can ask Andrew. If it's what do you suggest for organizations that are concerned about liability exposure for donating food? For example, if someone gets sick from leftover donated food, that could result in a lawsuit.
Well, thanks for the question. I don't want to get ahead of Jean on that because I suspect that she will have some perspective on that to share. But you know, generally, what people forget is that there is federal legislation, the Bill Emerson Good Samaritan Act, which was passed in, I believe, 1996, that does provide protection for people who in good faith donate food they believe to be safe. So there is, I know, some concern about that, but truly the liability is not there if you believe the food to be good and you hand it off. And in fact, I don't know of any cases where people have donated food and gotten into trouble. So it's something that I think a lot of people ask about, but there is protection there. And the key, I think, is just to feel good about it, is making sure that people receiving your food understand food safety and have demonstrated that once you hand over that product, they're going to be able to handle it carefully and appropriately.
Okay, great. Thank you for your response. And it looks like we have Jean back here. Her slides are up. So with that, I'll let you go ahead, Jean.
Jean, it looks like from my end we can see your screen, but for some reason your audio is not working. I wonder if there's something on your end that would allow you to enter the audio pin. And I don't know if perhaps hanging up and trying to call in again might work.
Shannon, while we're waiting, if there are any other questions on prevention, would be happy to take those. And if anyone's curious about things we can be doing to prevent food waste beyond what I've talked about already.
Yeah, I was just looking. I don't see any more questions typed, but please feel free, those of you on the call, to type in some of your questions now, and I can ask. One thing I was thinking of while you were speaking is, you know, some of the restaurants with really limited menu availability. And I was just curious, do you think that's something they're doing to help save money and reduce food waste, or is it just, you know, for other reasons?
You mean the choice to have a limited menu?
Correct, yeah. You know, some even have just a few options in each kind of category of appetizers, entrees, desserts, and that. Is that something they're doing to save money and conserve food waste, or is it more just the style?
That's a good question. I have not seen a lot of evidence that anyone's shaping their menu yet with food waste as a primary consideration. I think that people shape their menu based on being faithful to the restaurant or food service concept that they envision. And limited service has a bunch of appeal in terms of speed of service and ease of ordering and consistency of brand experience and those sorts of things. So and also ease of production and limited inventory on hand. And so I think there may be a number of reasons that might be more market driven around why people do it. But to your point, there's actually a lot of advantages, because if you are dealing with a more limited menu, you don't have to have as much inventory diversity, which means you have more easily transparent visibility on your inventory, which you're less likely to have items go bad on you while they're sitting on the shelf. You have the ability to use items from today, tomorrow, because you have the same menu that repeats, and that's always helpful as long as the item itself hasn't timed out, hasn't expired. And you get really good at doing those limited items effectively and timing them. And so you have, certainly in the quick serve market, a lot of folks who are doing some really great things with forecasting based on 15-minute increments of demand in an operation, how much food they should have out. So there are some benefits to going limited menu, but they really have to work under the concept, whereas in, you know, a casino buffet environment, it's really the opposite, right? The expectation is that we're going to have bountiful, beautiful product on our buffet. People want to see that diversity, and it's kind of part of the expectation. So the question is more, how do we manage that and merchandise that in a way that's efficient?
Okay, looks like we have, let's see here. Can you provide examples of how merchandising displays can be done effectively while reducing waste, and also have food service operations experienced customer satisfaction with smaller plates for smaller price?
Yeah, so two interesting questions there. So merchandising, there's tons of options. I mean, the most simple one is if you were in a scenario where you're using steam wells and traditional hotel pans, you know, you can just start by going to shallower pans and smaller pans and using granite or some sort of insert, stone insert, to make to fill up the rest of the space. And so you can have the product variety without using all the space. So that's one place to start that can be really high impact. Or better yet, get out of the hotel pans and go into a more limited, smaller size merchandising with some, you know, Bond chef or, you know, various types of really pretty merchandising tools. And then you can also, in terms of the plate sizes, we're seeing a lot of success with restaurants going to smaller portion sizes and, you know, lighter menus. And we're starting to see the research showing that something has changed in the American psyche, that instead of people just wanting more and bigger, wellness is starting to trickle into our thinking, and certainly price sensitivity. And the idea of being able to get a good meal with a smaller portion is starting to be attractive. And you're seeing even places like, you know, the Cheesecake Factory, which has a very diverse and big menu, offering smaller plates. And so I think it's a major trend.
Okay,
thank you so much.
Do we have Jean back now?
Jean, it looks like from my end that you have muted yourself in the control panel, and I'm not able to unmute you. So I don't know if you're able to go over to your control panel, look for the little green icon, and unmute.
Hit the little green icon.
Perfect. Oh, there you are.
We have you.
Great.
I'm sorry. I don't know what happened. I lost the phone connection all of a sudden. And I think
that happens. It's okay.
Hopefully it wasn't my fault, but
that's not a problem. So I'll let you go ahead. Thank you.
Okay, thanks. This is Mohegan's waste food recycling program. And what is happening is we're avoiding incineration costs as the landfills in the state of Connecticut are entirely closed. So it's waste to energy plants. So this is our avoided incineration cost, which since the year 2002, waste meat and vegetables from the Mohegan kitchens and restaurants are picked up every morning at 4 a.m. by the Malaris Piggery, which is a piggery in Waterford, Connecticut. And that is a paid-for service through our engineering department. In addition, the grease from all the kitchen and restaurant wastewater is removed by the automated grease recovery units, and the waste fryolator oil is picked up by Western Mass Rendering, which is our vendor that does the recycling. And they take it and use it as a constituent in either animal feedstock or to make biofuels. So this produces revenues from us, which currently is about 22 cents a pound for the yellow grease or the fryolator oil, and the gray grease is paying 3 cents a pound. So that goes back to the casino in revenues. And then the mitigation of the food cycle is in the picture format is this next slide, where the waste meat and veggies are going to the piggery. The chef buys back the hams, and the waste bedding that's coming from the piggery itself goes into a compost that's at the piggery, and he is generating plants for sale, and also worms, which can go for fishing. So the kitchens, which is down, the picture of the kitchens is down the left-hand bottom corner, is generating the grease and oil that's going off to Western Mass Rendering, and they're also generating bottles and cans, which are being recycled in 3 different locations. These dumpsters, we have a sky loading dock, an earth loading dock, and a wind loading dock, which is the names of the casinos, which are all interconnected. And then all of the dishes that are generated in the Mohegan Grill, which is the employee food service operation, are all washed and reused, as well as the cutlery that's used in the restaurant operations. I didn't get to say that we have a hotel that's got 1,200 rooms, so we've got room service, and we've got the 3 casinos. We also have shops in the casinos that generate revenues for those tenants. So the next slide is a recycling summary that I put together. We've basically been doing this since 2002, but I could not get the all of those years on this slide. So I'm going from 2007 through 2012. And what we're counting, or we're tracking, like Andrew was saying, was tons of trash, commingled bottles and cans, the cardboard, scrap metal, the office paper, and the office paper is going through a Easter Seal organization called EnviroShred. That is giving us the free shredding operation. Light iron, mixed paper, both of those gray and yellow greases, lamps, electronics, lead acid batteries, alkaline and Nikon CAD batteries, and then the piggery numbers are down the bottom. I've got number of barrels per month, as well as food waste in tons, and that's using 250 pounds per barrel as an average weight. So one thing that I did want to mention that's not on that chart is that we're doing approximately 270,000 covers per week, which since the year 2002, we have sent 15,171 tons to the Malaris piggery in the form of food scraps. So next slide, our overall features of Mohegan Sun food waste recycling system is the collection stations follow a logical flow of food waste from 5 distinct streams in the casino. So we've got the Uncas Grill, which is the employee dining room. We've got the sit-down dinners going on in the dining rooms, the banquet dining, the room service operation, and then the pot room with leftover food. The overall food waste system is devised of 13 Somat machines which pulverize, mix, and press the water out of the most food waste. This vastly reduces the volume and weight of the food sent to the piggery. Moreover, it reduces the excess water consumed by the pigs, which, according to the owner, can be a problem. The piggery charges a flat rate per barrel, not per pound. However, more food fits in each barrel when the water is removed and holds our costs down. Other stations, including the pot room, simply scrape the food waste into a barrel instead of it going into the Somat machine. The food waste is moved with wheeled gurneys to refrigerated locations to await pickup by the farmer. The waste oil is divided into 2 types. The more valuable yellow grease is the spent oil from the frylators that I mentioned, which is for deep frying and provides revenue to the casino. And the brown grease is the grease removed from our kitchen wastewater automated grease removal units, otherwise known as skimmer units, provides lesser revenues than the yellow grease. Yellow versus brown grease. The yellow grease is placed in tanks, which are 2,500 gallons, and those get pumped out by a tanker truck, which MWR or WMR sends to our location. They also own the tanks that are on site in 2 locations. The waste yellow grease is used as an animal food constituent, or these days they're converting it to biofuels for resale. The brown grease is removed from the wastewater by the AGRUs and is stored in drums and used also as an animal food constituent by the Western Mass Rendering Organization. Food waste recycling sequence is in a better place than the bottles and cans recycling. We had some problems on the bottles and cans side with plastic bags creating contamination in the dumpster when not removed prior to dumping. And then you're going to get some extra airspace, which we pay by the haul, we pay by the ton. So we want to minimize that. The fast food from the food court vendors at the casino is also lost. Malaris Piggery is the end destination, so going to compostable tableware and food packaging would not help here. The food from the Mohegan-owned restaurants goes to the piggery. Now, just recently, we've had another organization come in that is a proposed composting organization that is interested in looking at what our tenant-owned restaurants have for scrap food, which is still continuing to go at this point in time to regular trash. So they have come in and they are doing a survey of what is coming out of the tenant restaurants so they can get a handle on the volume. And then I just have a series of pictures. The tray collection belt in the employee dining room where the employee puts their tray after they're finished eating. This is the banquet plate and food waste coming in on trays. This is the room service beforehand. And of course, this is after room service has picked up the plate that's been eaten by the hotel guest. The shells go into the trash. The pot room is shown on the right-hand side with their barrel to scrape the food into. The pigs cannot have the shells from any seafood. They also cannot have too much bread, and they can't have corn cobs. So there's, of course, we have to minimize contamination such as glass or metal going in there as well. And then the food conducting trough for the Somat machine, that's what it looks like before it extracts the water. And then the Somat machine extracts the water from the food, and it ends up looking like a sort of a meal with rice, vegetables, and meat. The gurneys are used to transport the barrels to the refrigerator or the pump room. And there you can see a barrel on the left-hand side, and the gurneys are on the right. And these are our food waste barrels. The piggery owner cleans them out and steam cleans them before he brings them back the next day. The yellow grease barrels are at the pump room, and that's simply a pump operation that puts it into the 2,500-gallon tank for pickup by Western Mass Rendering. And as I mentioned, the farmer washes the barrels squeaky clean at the farm and then returns them to us to refill. And this is showing you the yellow grease collection tank to the right of the office paper dumpster, which is filled from the pump room, which was the previous slide. These are the interceptors. These are the AGRUs, which intercept or skim off the trap grease and the residual food waste. And here's the barrels when the AGRUs are done and they're full. They get taped up with plastic, 2 layers of plastic over the top, and then WMR picks them up like that, and they'll be, say, 20, 25 at a time. And this is what it looks like. This is down in our sky, across from our sky loading dock area, where all the barrels are waiting for pickup. This is some of the contamination of the bottles and cans with the plastic bags in the dumpster, which we're trying to eliminate. We've put up signs, and we're trying to school everyone in the fact that we don't want the plastic bags in with the bottles and cans. And that's it.
Okay, thank you, Jean. So I'll see here. So again, feel free to type your questions. We have some time for a few questions. Let's see. Mary, is there any way to make the question area larger to see them more easily? One question, Jean, is if you've considered building an on-site anaerobic digester to recover energy and create compost.
We have had people in here presenting at the recycle committee that I run on a quarterly basis for anaerobic digesters. It seems to be a batch process that I'm not sure we would have continuous batching available based on the operation. That's the only reason why. Plus, we have a space issue with the digesters.
Okay, great. And then another question for you, Jean, is if there's been any efforts in doing some of the food waste prevention, source reduction?
Well, that would be something that food and beverage could certainly look at. I have not broached the subject with them and tried to figure out, what we're doing. I know that there is a lot of prepping going on as far as, I see what goes into the piggery barrels, and it seems to be like fruit, the husks of the melons and things like that. So there is a lot of the prep waste going into the pig barrels.
Okay, and then another question for you is how do you deal with cold weather and grease? Is it an issue?
Well, all the AGRUs are in their own separate rooms except the one that's in the sky loading dock area. But it is undercover, and it is down in sort of a tunnel. So every AGRU is buffered from the freezing cold weather and snow and rain and precipitation. So they're basically in the parking garage level where they can be gotten to by the engineering department for fixing, and our kitchen mechanics take care of picking up the barrels and making sure with the plumbers that those units are up and running and continuously running.
Okay, and then another question for you is if somebody's wondering if you have a full-time coordinator that handles all of the recycling, auditing, and expansion of greening programs for the casino?
I am the recycling program chairwoman, and I do handle all the recycling issues, and my department has been Department of One since 2005 myself, and then I report to the Director of Compliance and Regulations, so we are just a very, very small department that handles all of the compliance issues. I also do all the training for all of the shops at Mohegan, which are all the engineering shops. We have painters, we have plumbers, we have carpet upholstery, we have electricians, we have HVAC, we have all these departments that need the RECRA awareness training is what I do in July. We also have a full service vehicle maintenance facility that is off reservation that's subject to Connecticut state regulations. So we have a stormwater pollution prevention plan. We do stormwater monitoring. We're right on the Thames River, so we have outfalls that are discharging to that river. So we do it all, and it's a full-time job. But at times I've had tribal member students of tribal members that are attending the university that I've had as summer interns, but I had that like 2 years in a row, and we were able to do a nice water quality study over at the Fort Shantok, which is the park, and also the burial ground for the Mohegans. So I've had a little bit of help from time to time, but not a lot.
Yeah, sounds like you're very, very busy. A lot on your plate.
It's a lot to maintain and also turn in all the reports to the state and the feds and everything else. So just wanted to say it's a well-run operation with a lot of departments that if it wasn't for them and being so organized, I don't think I could really do everything myself on this end.
Mm-hmm. So someone observed that your food waste generation has gone down annually since 2007, and they're wondering if that's a result of using education, the economy, software, or some other strategy.
I think a lot of it is to do with a downturn in the economy. There was a point in time where we were doing, back in 2005, we were doing 1,910 tons of food waste, and you can see that it's consistently gone down over the years. And we used to have 10,000 employees back in those 2005, 6, and 7, and there's been layoffs. There's been the economy basically just being reduced to the point where people don't have money to come over here and spend on luxury items. And unfortunately, one of those luxury items is gambling. But, we have an arena. We have a 10,000-seat arena, so we have people still coming over for shows. A lot of times they want to have something to eat before they go into the show. So, we've tried to diversify as much as possible with the shops, the shows, and the gambling, so that we're not consistently losing, although the amount that has been gambled over the years has consistently gone down.
Okay, and then another question for you is if you can offer some advice on presenting to leadership and casino heads when it comes to proposing a new greening endeavor, this person says, I can imagine you'd want to focus on cost savings, but what other areas should be highlighted? And thank you.
Well, I think that most of the time they are looking at the bottom line and asking themselves, you know, what kind of a payback. And simply put, if we don't have a 3-year payback, the idea is just not even considered. So the profit margin and the payback are two big things that are ruling the rest. And as far as energy conservation projects, we've consistently done multiple projects over the years, but I noticed that this year we have maybe one, and the things that the engineering department seem to be focusing on the most in the past, I'd say 3 to 4 years, are the retrofit of lighting, where we've pretty much gotten rid of all of the HIDs, all the high energy demand lighting has all been eliminated. We've gone to either fluorescent, and now these days we're going to LED replacements because the bulbs last longer and the quality of light is better. And so over the, like I say, the past 4 years, it's all been focused on the lighting retrofits, both fixture-wise and the bulb itself. And there's been just a huge volume of lighting retrofits and energy conservation put into that arena because we have so many lamps.
Okay, then another question here was, does the piggery pick up the food waste for free?
Actually, it's a paid-for service, and the only way we were able to reduce that, we at one point, I'd say 3 years ago, we were paying about $9.25 a barrel. But when 2 years ago we put it out to bid and found another piggery that was coincidentally enough in the same town, so there were neighbors. And when he ended up putting in a bid, the other fellow brought his price down, and so now we're paying about $7 a barrel. So as soon as he got a little bit of competition, he rethought what he was doing as far as the amount he was charging per barrel.
Okay, well, I think that's all the questions we have for now, and I see it's around 2, so I just have a couple announcements. And first of all, I just want to thank both Andrew and Jean again for presenting on this webinar. It's very informative and helpful. So again, the recorded webinar will be available on the Tribal P2 website, which is www.tribalp2.org. So it should be available either later today or tomorrow sometime, and please feel free to pass it on to others that couldn't make it. Our next webinar is Tuesday, May 28th, and it'll be on ventilation and smoke-reduced or smoke-free facilities. So if you have any projects you would like to share that are happening in your community related to that topic or any of the future topics, please get a hold of either myself or Mila Kelly and let us know. And also, we're always looking for new case studies on any pollution prevention topic to put on our website. If you're interested in sharing some of your projects with others, please let us know. So again, thank you, and have a great spring day.
Thank you very much.